Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. It's day 6 of the government shutdown. Shockingly, we still have roads. In fact, there's been very little pain for regular Americans who, assuming the shutdown can get to the magic 61 days, stand to save hundreds of billions while laying off hundreds of thousands of left-wing federal parasites. Meanwhile, the military and ICE is still being paid since the big beautiful bill cleverly assigned a big pot of money as mandatory, meaning it keeps going in a government shutdown. Where there has been a lot of pain is Democrats, as Donald Trump cuts billions out of their pet programs. He immediately blocked $28 billion in federal funds to New York, Chicago, and 16 blue states for global warming and mass transit money holes, with a promised agency-by-agency review to cut tens of billions more. As Newt Gingrich put it, the Trump team is saying, quote, "Every day this is shut, we will find ways to pay for everything we want. We'll find ways to eliminate everything you want, and we will do it legally." Or as Trump put it, quote, "I can't believe Democrats gave me this opportunity." Now, this is all led by Russ Vought, Trump's base director of the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, which is essentially the air traffic controller for the administration on spending and layoffs. Now, the left is downright depressed. The New York Times calls it, quote, "the be careful what you wish for shutdown." Politico laments the shutdown is not hurting voters, it's only hurting Democrats. Both are blaming Democrats for overplaying their hand. Politico calls them, quote, "cringe." When Politico thinks you are cringe, it's bad news. Now, indeed, polling says voters also think Dems are cringe, which probably surprised them since legacy media used to be able to pin shutdowns on Republicans. The New York Times' own polling shows 65% of voters say, quote, "Democrats should not shut down government," their wording. That includes 92% of Republicans. It includes independents 2-1. Half of Democrat voters say Democrats shouldn't have shut down. When your own voters are 50-50 and everyone else is 4-1, that is very bad. Now, this is all stiffening Republican spines for once. Prediction market Kalshi's shutdown tracker is now up to 21 days. That's up from 6 days when it started, with 20% odds that the shutdown passes 35 days, the previous record set back in 2018 showdown over the wall. On this trend, we could get to that magic 61-day paradise of permanent federal layoffs. In the meantime, Trump can get a lot done with the fiscal emergency built into a shutdown. So Kalshi's estimate for permanent federal layoffs is up by 35,000 in the past week alone. Odds the deficit will shrink this year up to 36%. That was just 12% in August. As for the endgame, there are two ways out. Either Democrats surrender and agree to a so-called clean resolution extending last year's spending, or Republicans surrender, adding hundreds of billions in Obamacare subsidies or free health care for illegals. Now, historically, Republicans always surrender, cowering before the might of mainstream media, but those days are gone. Republican odds of winning the midterms are actually up on Kalshi since the shutdown started. And Napoleon famously said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." If Republicans hold the line, at worst, Dems crawl back in their box and stop exporting money for illegals. At best, Dems keep going to day 61, and Trump gets to wipe out their army of federal workers. Healthcare costs are skyrocketing, and Obamacare was at the center of the current government shutdown, made it worse. Last week, proud socialist Bernie Sanders shared a chart showing healthcare costs are up 121% since the year 2000. That's 1.5 times inflation. The weird part is the chart is pretty much a straight line. There is zero impact from Obamacare, the so-called Affordable Care Act. Now, if you were around back in 2008, you will recall that Obamacare was supposed to fix healthcare costs once and for all. Bend the curve was the slogan. This did not happen for one simple reason: lobbyists who gamed Obamacare into a Trojan horse, supercharging our ruling healthcare cartels. In short, hospitals, HMOs, and pharma poured money into Congress to turn ACA into a permanent gold-plated monopoly. Poured is an understatement. Healthcare spent over $400 million lobbying Obamacare by 1,249 unique organizations. For perspective, Big Tech spends about $9 million a year on lobbying. Hollywood spends $5 million. There's actually a nice model for this by economist Bruce Yandel called Baptists and Bootleggers. As in, Baptists think you shouldn't be able to buy whiskey at Walmart, and bootleggers who sell illegal whiskey off the porch agree. The Baptists are the political momentum, the bootleggers and their lobbyists write law. So the public demanded affordable health care. The bootleggers in the $3 trillion healthcare industry who want expensive health care, well, they wrote the bill. So what did all this money buy? Congress immediately dropped plans to allow Medicare and Medicaid to negotiate lower prescription prices or allow imports from Canada. They shut out biologics, biosimilars, and generics that compete with pharma, but the big payoff was wiping out small providers. So Obamacare drove an estimated 457 hospital mergers. It drove over 7,000 independent physicians and physician groups out of business. They were forced to go work for these surviving mega hospitals. So instead of charging you hundreds at the doctor's office, now they charge you thousands at the hospital. It did the same to pharmacies, consolidating them into a handful of providers, so-called PBMs, who steer customers to expensive drugs with big kickbacks, so-called rebates, while hospitals vertically integrated, bringing pharmacy in-house so they can charge whatever they like. Next, the ACA imposed a so-called medical loss ratio that encouraged hospitals to charge more so they can book more in profit. They expanded mandated treatments, including gender reassignment. Finally, Obamacare imposed new administrative burdens topping $100,000 for a small practice. That, like all regulations, prices out small providers who cannot afford full-time administrators. When the smoke cleared, 42% of independent medical practices closed, including 7,000 in the past 5 years alone. And hospitals now employ over half of doctors. Before Obamacare, it was 1 in 4. So what's next? Every time government fixes healthcare, it gets worse because lobbyist money talks. Obamacare will keep going, sucking in more and more taxpayer subsidies to hide the cost. The way to fix it is first, repeal these reforms so independents come back, then push price transparency and cost sharing so hospitals compete on price and patients bother shopping on price. Finally, either allow drug imports or require pharma charge the same in America as abroad, so sick Americans are not subsidizing socialized medicine in Canada and Europe. Trump has been uniquely willing to go to war with health and pharma. The question is whether Congress listens to the Baptists or the bootleggers. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. Now back to our show. Nine days into a shutdown, they are winning. Republicans in Congress amazingly have not surrendered yet. Instead, Republicans are sitting back and letting it play out, telling Dems, reopen the government with zero additional spending, then we can talk. In other words, release the hostages, then we can talk about the $1 million and a helicopter. Even Republican Senate Leader John Thune, who's usually Rhino adjacent, is holding the line, telling Dems a clean offer is already on the table, take it or leave it. Now, the reason is partly because Trump is being careful to keep the popular bits of government open while hitting the unpopular stuff like corporate welfare for green energy and money-hole subways in New York. But it's mostly because, in contrast to previous shutdowns, legacy media has singularly failed to gaslight voters. I mentioned the New York Times' own poll showing 65% of voters blame Democrats for the shutdown, including 92% of Republicans, almost 70% of independents, and half of Democrat voters. This means Republicans are suffering zero fallout from the shutdown. In fact, it's energizing the base. I haven't seen people this excited since the early days of Doge. This is coming through the numbers. So Republican odds of winning the midterm elections on Kalshi, which is the sword hanging over everything Congress does, Democrat and Republican, are actually up since the shutdown began. Now, this is all very odd. Usually, legacy media pins everything bad on Republicans, from hurricanes to ICE riots, which is why Republicans historically chicken out of shutdowns. The press flays them alive. So why is legacy media failing? Because voters don't trust them anymore. Gallup just released a fresh poll finding trust in media hit a new record low, with 7 in 10 Americans saying they don't trust media. In fact, trust in media fell by a third in just 5 years. I guess the mostly peaceful riots, or brought to you by Pfizer, was a mistake. Trust is down to just 8% of Republicans, 27% of independents, and half of Democrats who no longer believe media. By amazing coincidence, you'll notice these numbers are almost precisely the same as the percent of voters blaming Democrats for these shutdowns. In other words, once the media hallucination is gone, voters red pill hard. Meanwhile, legacy media itself is in free fall. I mentioned recently how Hollywood box office is down by half since COVID. Nearly 80% of journalists are gone since the peak. And how new media is dominated by independents. Of the top 50 podcasts, 86% are independent, from Joe Rogan to Scott Adams to Theo Von. What's left of legacy media is getting bought up at garage sale prices by Trump-aligned billionaires. So Larry Ellison just bought CBS and TikTok. Trump ally Patrick Soon-Shiong bought the LA Times, and both MSNBC and CNN are being organized for sale. So as next, Republicans have spent 80 years cowering in fear before legacy media, ever since FDR first started throwing journalists in jail and holding broadcast licenses hostage to pro-government propaganda. This is now the first post-media shutdown, the first real test. Republicans in Congress may be too stupid to recognize it, but the world has changed. Their voters no longer want surrender. We want them to fight. Japan just veered sharply to the right, another domino in the worldwide shift towards Trump-style populism. When do the mass deportations start? Last week, Japan's ruling LDP elected a new leader, Sarai Takaichi, replacing their recently dumped PM who was sporting a 21% approval. Takaichi is being compared to Margaret Thatcher as a take-no-prisoners conservative. And given the LDP controls the legislature, she is almost guaranteed to be the next prime minister. The outcome was a shock. As one Goldman analyst put it, quote, virtually no one expected this result, including media, political analysts, opposition parties, and even LDP insiders. Now, it happened because of a last-minute swing by the so-called ASO faction, which wants stronger military, conservative social policy, including a ban on same-sex marriage, and is pro-fossil fuel in a country where green energy pixie farts have sent electric bills up 40%. Controversially, Takaichi even criticized the tsunami of third-world migrants flooding into Japan, noting cases of migrants kicking the tame deer that free-roam her native Nara. Now, this set off a frenzy in Japan's left-wing media, but average Japanese are sick of them. I mentioned in recent videos that Japan is now awash in low-skill migrants, since big Japanese companies like ours love paying third-world wages and leaving the rest of us to deal with the crime and welfare. Japan's already got 2 million foreign workers, overwhelmingly low wage, and the government recently rammed through a plan to import another 300,000 per year through 2040. In U.S. terms, given the population, that's about 1 million a year. Just 23% of Japanese want more migrants, but corporate money talks in Japan too. This has, of course, crushed Japanese wages. The average wage in Japan is now $14 an hour. In the U.S., it's $37. In Tokyo, 7-Eleven pays $8 an hour in Tokyo because there's a line of Bangladeshis who will take it at $8. Meanwhile, 13 million Japanese are jobless out of the labor force, ranging from shut-in young men who do literally nothing to elderly Japanese trying to make ends meet. Now, beyond immigration, Takaichi's biggest changes will be Japan's security stance, meaning a tougher line towards China and more military spending, so Donald Trump does not walk away from a relationship where American taxpayers effectively pay for Japan's defense, along with the economy where Takaichi has pushed for more government stimulus and lower interest rates that are already just 0.5%. Both will drive inflation that's already running 3.5% in Japan, with 7% inflation in food in the past year. More important, Japan has a gargantuan national debt of 240% of GDP. It's about twice ours, so it's equivalent to 71 trillion in U.S. terms. Blowing out the deficit is a risk when Japan is already having regular financial panics, including a yen crash last year that sent stocks down 12% in a day, a series of bond market panics over normalization of rates, and a debt scare in June of this year, just a couple months ago. So as an expert, Japan is the poster child for crony capitalism, with crushing levels of government spending and crony regulations that killed growth to the point wages are lower than they were 35 years ago. Socially, Takaichi is long overdue. Japanese should protect their culture, traditions, and still peaceful society. Economically, she's pushing Japan to the edge of the cliff. For Americans, the one silver lining is maybe a crisis in Japan will knock some sense into our crony capitalists in Washington. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada. They're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. A new study from J.P. Morgan finds real incomes for Americans are negative since Bidenflation started in 2022. In modern times, that has never happened outside of recession, which is odd considering Biden was allegedly an economic miracle. As fangirl Paul Krugman put it, quote, "It may be hard for normal human beings to appreciate the awesomeness of Biden's economy." Not a joke. The culprit, of course, is fake inflation numbers, because if you undercount inflation, you overcount growth. Fake it enough, and even stagflation can be very awesome on paper. The problem is zoom out, and undercounting inflation means the average American has flatlined for 25 years. Now, we can estimate the undercount with the humble Big Mac, which is the gold standard for measuring true inflation. The Economist magazine actually publishes a Big Mac index comparing currency exchange rates to what they should be in Big Macs as a way to detect currency manipulation or fake statistics. The reason is the Big Mac is the same everywhere in the world, and it captures a wide range of prices, so wages, rents, food, energy, gasoline, insurance, regulation. Moreover, official CPI is infested with statistical games, including so-called hedonic adjustment, where they cancel price hikes saying maybe the product's better, like it's a smaller carbon footprint, or so-called substitution effects, where people stop buying stuff that got expensive, they switch from steak to chicken, which also hides inflation. The new basket is not the old basket. So doing it with Big Macs is apples to apples. And according to McDonald's, a Big Mac in 2019 set you back $4.39. Today it's $5.79, 32% higher. The kicker is official inflation only went up 25%. In other words, we are about 7% poorer, $5,000 per household, than statistics say, in just 6 years. It gets worse when you zoom out. So since the year 2000, the official narrative is the U.S. economy grew in real terms 1.35% per year per person, while inflation was just 2.5%. 1.3 is pretty rough, but at least it is growth. But Big Macs did not go up 2.5% per year. They went up 4% per year, meaning it was not 1.3 growth, it was negative growth. 25 lost years for the average American. Now, if that sounds crazy, walk through the numbers. Since 2000, official household income in dollars doubled, but prices actually rose faster. In other words, the income is worth less than it was 25 years ago. So gasoline and house prices went up 2.5 times, college tuition and steak went up 3 times, health insurance went up 4 times. The hours of work required to buy a new home went from 12,000 hours in 2000 to 18,000 hours today. Health insurance went from 110 hours to 173 hours. And yes, a Big Mac went from 9 minutes to 15 minutes today. All three imply we are a third poorer than in 2000. Now, anybody with assets made out like bandits thanks to artificially low interest rates that pumped stocks and home equity, but given the bottom half of Americans own just 6% of financial assets, they've been treading water for 25 years, floated by personal debt that went from $7 trillion in 2000 to $18 trillion today. So as next, Trump is trying to reverse decades of stagnation hidden by fake numbers. Without game-changing cuts to federal spending and regulation, it will take decades to fix. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.